I've never been the type to believe in supernatural stuff. To me, ghost stories and monsters were just that. Stories, fantasies, all made up by an overly creative mind. But that all changed the night I decided to go camping in Blackwood Forest, deep in the US, with some friends. That night changed my life forever. It was a Friday in the summer. My friends, Jack and Mike, and I decided to escape the city for a weekend in the quiet, peaceful woods. We wanted something simple, a campfire, marshmallows, and the peace of being in the middle of nowhere. We picked Blackwood because it was known for its trails and scenery, and on top of that, the chances of running into other campers were slim to none. Perfect. Exactly what we were looking for. We left in the late afternoon, right after work. The dirt road leading to the forest was quiet, and the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. By the time we reached the start of the trail, it was getting dark. We grabbed our backpacks and flashlights and began the hike to our campsite. The forest was thick and full of tall, sturdy trees, almost like it was swallowing us up. The air was chilly, and the only sounds were the crunch of leaves under our feet and some small animals in the distance. After about 40 minutes, we found a good spot to set up camp near a small stream. We built a fire and sat around it, eating and drinking. We laughed, told jokes, and, inevitably, started sharing scary stories. That's when Mike mentioned something about Blackwood being haunted. I laughed, thinking he was just trying to spook us. I thought it was all just a joke, but Jack went quiet and serious, like he knew something we didn't. As the night got colder and the fire started to die down, we decided to call it a night. We were exhausted, and the idea of a good night's sleep with nature as our background noise was pretty inviting. The night sky was truly a masterpiece, but I had barely closed my eyes when I heard a sound. It was like a whisper, very low, coming from outside the tent. I thought it was the wind, but when I focused, I realized it was words. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was clearly a voice, like someone was talking to someone. My heart started racing. I called out to my friends, but they seemed to be fast asleep. I got up and stepped out of the tent. The fire was almost out, but there was enough light to see around. I looked around but didn't see anything, just darkness and the shadows of the trees. The sound had stopped. I figured I was just hearing things because of Jack's story earlier. So, I went back into the tent, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. I lay down again and closed my eyes, but then the whisper returned, clearer this time. It sounded closer, almost like it was inside my head. A chill ran down my spine. I got out of the tent again, this time with my flashlight on. I looked around, spinning in circles, but there was nothing but darkness and the sound of the stream. Yet the whisper continued, louder. Suddenly, I felt a cold shiver, like something or someone was watching me. I decided to wake the others. I went into Jack and Mike's tent and shook them, trying not to sound scared. They woke up, a bit confused, but when I told them about the whispers, they became more alert. Jack grabbed his flashlight and stepped out of the tent, with Mike right behind. We stood in silence for a moment, just listening to the stream and the rustling leaves. My heart was pounding. Everything suddenly felt much more terrifying, and there was a thick tension in the air from fear. Then, we all heard it. A soft, low giggle, like a child laughing. We looked around, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Mike pointed his flashlight toward the stream, and that's when we saw it. A pale figure standing by the water's edge, partially hidden by the bushes. It was a woman, wearing a long, dirty white dress. Her hair was messy, falling over her face. She had her back to us, staring at the water. We froze, unsure of what to do. Panic started rising in my chest. Jack took a step forward, trying to get closer, but at that moment, the woman turned her face toward us. Her eyes were empty, like they were just black holes. She opened her mouth, and the whisper came back, clearly coming from her now. Mike let out a scream and stumbled backward, falling. Jack pulled him up, and we all started running, not looking back. We ran along the trail, tripping over roots and branches, trying to reach the car as fast as possible. The whisper followed us, mixed with the giggling. It felt like the whole forest was alive, mocking our attempt to escape. When we finally reached the car, we were panting and covered in sweat. Jack tried to start the car, but his hands were shaking so much he almost dropped the keys. Mike was staring down the trail, expecting the woman to appear out of the shadows at any second. I was so scared, I couldn't even think straight. I just wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. The engine finally roared to life, and Jack sped down the dirt road. I looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the figure chasing us, but there was nothing. The whisper and the giggle had disappeared. The forest behind us was silent and empty, like nothing had ever happened. When we reached the nearest town, we stopped at a 24-hour diner. We were all in shock, trying to process what had just happened. Mike was pale, shaking. Jack, always the skeptic, couldn't stop staring into space, like he was trying to find a rational explanation for what we'd seen. We didn't talk much after that. We knew no one would believe us, so we didn't even try to tell the story. We packed up and went back to the city, swearing never to return to Blackwood Forest. To this day, whenever I close my eyes, I can still hear that whisper. And no matter how much time passes, I know I'll never forget the face of that woman, with her empty eyes and creepy smile. The forest has its secrets, and we were lucky to make it out alive. Because that night, I learned the hard way that some scary stories are real, and sometimes it's better not to know what lurks in the shadows. I've always been a fan of walking. For years, I've had the habit of walking every day. Walks are my passion. Every day, right after work, I put on my running shoes, grab a water bottle, and head to the forest in the park. It was a peaceful place, full of tall, ancient trees that gave me a great sense of calm. I liked that feeling of being isolated from the world, surrounded only by the sound of birds and the wind rustling through the leaves. The forest was part of a preserved reserve, with several well-marked, safe trails for running and walking. It was one of the few places where I truly felt at peace. That day, the sun was already starting to set when I entered the main trail. I love walking at dusk when the sun's rays filter through the trees and create a beautiful mix of light and shadow. The trail was almost empty, just a few hurried runners and a couple of people walking their dogs. I kept walking, enjoying the sound of my steps on the packed dirt. As the sun disappeared behind the trees, the forest began to change. The sounds of nature, which used to calm me, started to sound different, louder, closer. I can't quite explain it, but I started feeling like someone or something was watching me. I looked around, trying to see if anyone else was on the trail. Nothing, just me, the trees, and the silence that was starting to settle in. My mind went into some kind of red alert. I walked there every day, but this was the first time I'd ever felt something strange creeping over me. The atmosphere felt darker, colder, and eerier. I picked up my pace, trying to shake off that odd feeling. It was just my mind playing tricks on me, I thought, but then I heard it. I jumped in shock. The snap of a breaking branch. I stopped immediately. I turned around, trying to see something between the trees. Nothing. No movement. No sound. My heart started racing, and my breathing got heavier. Maybe it was just an animal, a squirrel or a deer. But deep down, something told me it wasn't. I kept walking, now faster. I just wanted to get to the end of the trail, to get out of that forest that was suddenly feeling so hostile. Then I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow and careful, like someone was trying not to be heard. I quickly turned around, but once again, saw nothing. Just shadows, more shadows. I knew something was there, hidden among the trees, watching me, following me. A chill ran down my spine. It felt like the air had gotten colder, heavier. My instincts told me to run, but my legs felt frozen to the ground. I was trying to analyze the situation. Was it just an animal in the woods, or just my imagination running wild with fear? Finally, I managed to move, and I started running. Even though I was a bit tired, I gathered all my strength and ran. I ran like my life depended on it. The footsteps behind me got louder. I ran faster, not looking back. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, my breathing fast and out of control. All I wanted was to get out of there, out of that forest that now felt like a nightmare. After a while, I was drenched in sweat and exhausted. The forest wears you out faster if you're not well prepared. The end of the trail still seemed far away, and darkness was closing in. The trees around me seemed to be closing in too, like they were trying to trap me there. I tripped over a root and almost fell. My knee scraped against the ground, but I didn't stop. I knew that if I stopped, whatever was following me would catch me. I kept running, faster and faster, but the footsteps behind me didn't stop. In fact, they were getting closer. At one point, I could hear heavy breathing, almost gasping, right behind me. It was real. Someone or something was there. I turned desperately while running, trying to see what it was, but it was pitch black. I was running out of air. My legs were starting to give out, but fear kept pushing me forward. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped. Everything went silent. I stopped too, trying to catch my breath and figure out what was happening. I looked around, but I couldn't see anything. It was too dark. My heart was racing, and sweat was dripping down my face. And then I saw it. Right in the middle of the trail, a figure. Tall, thin. It seemed to be covered by something I couldn't make out, like a veil of shadows. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was staring directly at me. I wanted to run, scream, do anything, but my body wouldn't respond, both because of fear and exhaustion. My body needed a few minutes to rest. I had been running for a while, and I really needed to recover my energy. The figure started moving toward me, slowly, almost as if it was gliding across the ground. My feet finally obeyed, and I ran in the opposite direction, not looking back. I ran non-stop until I saw the lights of the park entrance ahead. I almost fell to my knees when I got off the trail, finally back in the parking lot. I looked back, panting, but there was nothing there. No figure, no sound, just the darkness of the forest. I got to my car, my hands shaking so much I could barely hold the keys. I got in the car and slammed the door shut. I sat there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. Was my mind playing tricks on me? Was it just exhaustion? But I knew it wasn't. I knew there was something in that forest, something that followed me, that watched me. I never went back to that trail, and every time I drive past that forest, I get the same chill down my spine, like it's still watching me, waiting to come after me again. And I know that next time, I might not be able to escape. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. My friends and I decided to go fishing at a remote lake, deep in a dense forest. We've always loved this kind of adventure, getting away from the rush of the city, just us and nature. The lake was one of those places that not many people knew about. There was no cell phone signal, and the only way to get there was through a trail that went through the forest. I've always loved the silence of the woods, the feeling of being far from everything. So when Mike suggested this trip, I didn't think twice. On the way, the weather was great. The sun was shining, and the leaves on the trees danced with the soft wind. We were excited, laughing and telling stories about past fishing trips. When we got to the lake, it was exactly as Mike had described, calm, almost untouched. We set up camp near the shore, pitched the tents, and got the fishing gear ready. The plan was simple: spend the day fishing, eat what we caught, and sleep under the stars. It all seemed perfect. The afternoon flew by. We caught some fish and started preparing dinner, talking and having a few drinks. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest around the lake started to change. What had once felt peaceful was now starting to feel strange. The sound of the leaves moving in the wind grew louder, almost like whispers. I could have sworn I heard my name being called from somewhere in the woods, but I didn't think much of it. It was probably just my imagination or the drinks. After eating, Mark, as usual, started telling ghost stories. He loved scaring us. He told one about a hunter who disappeared in the forest years ago and whose body was never found. They say his spirit still wanders around here, he said, laughing. We all laughed, but something about the air bothered me. The wind had gotten colder, and the shadows of the trees seemed to stretch out, reaching toward us. It was night by the time we heard the first noise, a twig snapping, followed by slow footsteps in the dark. Everyone stopped laughing immediately. Did you hear that? I asked. The others nodded, looking around, trying to something in the darkness. The sound seemed to come from inside the forest, but it was hard to tell exactly where. I grabbed a flashlight and pointed it toward the trees. The weak beam barely lit the path. "It's probably some animal," Mike said, trying to sound calm, but I could see the nervousness in his eyes. I think he said it just to reassure himself. We decided not to think too much about it, but everyone was more alert, and we kept glancing toward the forest more often. Then, we heard it again. This time, it was closer, as if something or someone was moving around us, but staying at a distance. "That's not an animal," Mark whispered. "Animals don't walk like that." A chill ran down my spine. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. The night grew more tense. No one could sleep. We sat around the fire, speaking in low voices, waiting for sleep to come, but the sound of footsteps continued. It seemed to be circling us. With each sound, the firelight flickered, almost as if it was responding to whatever was hiding in the dark. And then we saw it. On the other side of the lake, a figure appeared. Tall, thin, wrapped in shadows. We couldn't see its face, but we knew it was looking directly at us. My heart raced. "Who's there?" Mike shouted, but the figure didn't respond. It just stood there, motionless. Then it began to move, floating across the surface of the water, completely silent. "No one moves like that," I whispered. "That's not human." And I knew I was right. We all knew. That thing wasn't flesh and bone. It was something else. Something evil. Panic set in. "We need to get out of here," Mark said, starting to gather his things. But as we did, we realized something worse. That thing was now in the trees, much closer. The sound of branches breaking and leaves being trampled surrounded us. Fear took over. We knew running down the trail in the dark was dangerous, but staying there felt like a death sentence. "Run!" I yelled. We grabbed what we could and bolted for the trail. The darkness of the forest was almost complete. The sound of our footsteps mixed with the sound of that thing behind us, as if it was playing, enjoying our fear. We ran without stopping, tripping over roots and rocks, our breathing heavy, our hearts pounding. The sound continued, always behind us, never farther away, never closer. I began to feel like the whole forest was alive, trying to trap us there forever. A sense of absolute despair took over me. When we finally saw the end of the trail, I almost collapsed with relief. We ran to the car and jumped in, locking all the doors. Mike started the engine, and we sped off. As we pulled away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and, for a second, I swear I saw that figure standing at the trail entrance, watching us. The fear was still there, but at least we were away from it, whatever it was. We made it home, but none of us slept that night. What we saw, what we heard, none of it made sense. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see that figure in the shadows, smell the damp forest, and hear the whispers in the wind. We never went back to that lake. I've never spoken about it to anyone again, but every night, before I go to sleep, I still feel that presence, like it's waiting, out there in the dark, to get me again. I even had nightmares about that terrifying figure for a while. I still feel like we weren't just followed that night. We were chosen, and something tells me that, one day, we'll have to go back to the forest, to that lake, to that thing that's waiting for us.